Hello everyone, welcome to Honey Creek New Providence Friends Church virtual meeting for worship on November 29th and first Sunday of Advent. And today, we're recording it Thursday night, a week and a half early. But our text today is from Genesis, the 32nd chapter, verses 22 through 31. And again, this is a very well-known story, but I found a lot of really beautiful gems, primarily through the scholarship and writings of Walter Brueggemann in his commentary on Genesis in the Interpretation series. And anyway, you're going to hear a lot of Brueggemann's thinking, which I'm borrowing from him, and then I've embellished and have tried to add to his thoughts on this Sunday morning as we think deeply about God, which is an act of love, is to think about God. The text begins with that night, and that night refers to the night before Jacob is to meet Esau, and this is going to be the first time they connect after they have split apart because Jacob had stolen Esau's birthright from their father Laban. So Jacob is anxious because Esau is bringing men with him. So he doesn't know if he's going to survive tomorrow. He's stressed out. That night, Jacob got up and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed the ford of the Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, "Let me go, for it is daybreak." But Jacob replied, "I will not let you go unless you bless me." The man asked him, "What is your name?" "Jacob," he answered. Then the man said, "Your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with humans and have overcome." Jacob then says, "Please, I pray, tell me your name." But he replied, "Why do you ask my name?" Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, "It is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared." The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Now, back in the 1970s, there was a series on television called The Night Stalker, and it starred Darren McGavin, and I just loved that show because he was chasing after vampires, and he was a vampire slayer way before Buffy the Vampire Slayer came along. And I loved Darren McGavin's character. He was in the night stalking around, hunting down vampires and taking care of business. And I've been thinking about this night stalker that comes to Jacob, stalks him in the night. Now, one of the things we have to realize about Jacob is that Jacob was incredibly strong. He used a standing stone, which standing stones were erected wherever God did something marvelous. God would command them to stand up 12 stones and symbolize the 12 tribes, like when they cross the river Jordan from the wilderness into the promised land. The Israel stood up 12 standing stones. They're not little stones. They're big. They're heavy. And Jacob got up early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had placed as a support for his head. He used a standing stone for his pillow, if you catch the drift here, and set it up as a memorial stone, a standing stone, and poured oil on its top. Jacob then later meets Rachel, who is the daughter of his uncle, and Laban's sheep, and they're at this well, And on every ancient water well, there was a large stone that covered it so animals wouldn't fall into it and contaminate the water. So marauders couldn't get water. They would have to work at it to get to the water. And so they placed these large flat stones over the tops of water wells. Now we're told that when Jacob saw Rachel and Laban's sheep, he went over, being Jacob, and rolled the stone away from the mouth of the well and watered his uncle's sheep. Now, we have to understand that these stones were so large that it usually took 2 or 3 men to do this. Jacob removes this stone that is large, and we go back to Genesis 29:2, and it says the stone over the mouth of the well was large. And in a way, of course, Jacob is smitten by Rachel, and so he goes over, the big manly man, and says, hey babe, check these out. He kisses his guns, he grabs that stone, he throws it off the well and waters the sheep. He's showing off in a way. Now, prior to this wrestling with the angel of God, this night stalker, we know from the biblical account that Jacob's character is less than admirable. His very name means one who grasps and overreaches, and even means trickster. He stole the blessing from Esau by deceiving Laban, their father. Jacob will do anything to get a blessing. Now he is full of remorse. He's not full of repentance. He's full of remorse because Jacob is going to meet Esau in the next day, and he tries to extricate himself from this difficult situation. But overnight, before this occurs, the night stalker shows up, the messenger of God, the angel of God. And we find that Jacob asks for a blessing from this unnamed man, this night stalker. Perhaps Jacob was in trying to secure land and more children and security and wealth. Well, we're not exactly sure, but knowing his prior character, he was looking out for himself. And so during this World Federation wrestling match between Jacob and the angel of God, the unnamed one asks Jacob, "What is your name?" And Jacob answers, "I am Jacob, the son of Laban." And what Jacob receives, instead of the traditional blessings of power and wealth and more children and security and land, is that Jacob receives a new name, Israel. He receives a new identity. His former name, Jacob, as I've said earlier, means overreacher, a trickster, a grasper, grasping at the heel of his older brother Esau, who was a twin and follows him right out of the womb. Now he's given a new name, a new identity, and he receives the name Israel, and his old identity is swept away as he is renamed by the night stalker, by the angel of God. Israel, we're not sure exactly what that term means. It could mean God prevails, God rules, God preserves, even God protects. But what is even more important than the etymology of the name Israel is that a new human being is called forth. Jacob is gone. Israel is born. And now Jacob Israel is forever welded to this wrestling match in the night. As Brueggemann says, he is one who engages in wrestling at night, but he's a promise keeper by day, speaking of God. Later, as the story continues, Jacob asks the night stalker, "Please tell me your name." Now, This is incredibly bold of Jacob. Jacob Israel. In the other two exchanges, the stranger is the one who asks the questions. Now Jacob dares to inquire about the name of the night stalker. And inquiring minds have to know. Or do they? Jacob Israel is grasping to know the name of God. Jacob wants to close the gap between his lack of information and the knowledge of this God that has approached him in the night. The night stalker does not disclose his name. He does not tell Jacob his name. Now we have to understand that in the ancient Jewish culture, when you ask for someone's name, you're saying in a way, I want to understand you so I can fully understand your character so that perhaps I can use it to my advantage. I mean, if we think about Jacob, in the Jewish tradition, people were given names to reflect their character. So Jacob is asking this night stalker, what is your character? And the night stalker does not tell him. He remains silent. We're the same way. The power of naming is a gift from God. If you recall, clear back in Genesis 2, God creates Adam, humanity, and He calls all the creatures to pass by Adam, to name them. Because naming gives us a sense of power. It allows us to wrap our minds around whatever we're thinking about and discussing or worried about. Now, when we are facing physical abnormalities, if we have blood coming out of places that we shouldn't have blood, or we have pains that we have not had before, we have anxiety and worry because we do not know what's going on. Now, do I have Crohn's disease? Do I have cancer? Do I have irritable bowel syndrome? Or do I just have gas? But once we're given a diagnosis by a physician, our anxiety and our stress drops down because now we have a name. Now we can kind of understand where we're headed and what we're going to have to do to fight this disease, if we even have a disease. Naming things gives us a sense of mastery over something. But here in this dialogue between the night stalker and Jacob, God will not be forced by Jacob nor anyone else to disclose his name. Of course, we know in Exodus with Moses, that name will eventually be disclosed, but even the name that is given to Moses, I am, which also can be translated, I am becoming what I am becoming, which is, of course, then something we can't quite grasp because God is beyond our categories of thinking. However, after all this night wrestling match with the angel of God, there's no divulging any information. Rather, the messenger, the night stalker, blesses Jacob. And as Brueggemann says, this is how Israel appears on the horizon of history. It comes not by land or wealth or power, but through a blessing and, in Brueggemann's words, an assault by God. Now that's an interesting insight, that Jacob is assaulted by God. He touches his hip. He cripples him. He hurts him. And when the day breaks, night is gone, along with the night stalker. And so is Jacob. Jacob is also gone. This strong giant of a man who uses massive standing stones for pillows at night and sets them up by himself vertically. This He-Man has been swept away and a cripple remains. And his name is Israel. God prevails. Now, we cannot miss that the new Israel, this new name, is linked to this encounter with God that leaves Jacob wounded. God prevails. And what we find is that Israel is a God, is about a people victimized by the assault of God. Again, this is Brueggemann speaking. An assault by God which stamps upon Israel forever its obedience or disobedience. This night stalker, this God, this angel, changed Jacob, Israel, forever. Jacob, the giant, now is limp. He's crippled. The super strong one who overreached, who was the overreacher and the grasper, has now been marked. And that mark has been left on his manhood and his destiny. When I think of God, I think of a God who comes and heals us and forgives us and reconciles. But here in this primitive story of Israel's birth, God wounds Jacob, who becomes Israel. Engaging God cripples Jacob. And here is a mystery. The new name, Israel, given Jacob, is welded to the new crippling of him. If you recall, those who have sojourned with Moses to Mount Sinai were terrified in facing God. Jacob, however, has gone where no Hebrew dared to go before. Jacob is the Captain James T. Kirk commanding the Enterprise. He has boldly gone where no person has gone before. He has encountered God face to face and has left different. He is wounded. His power is reduced. And that is why that's why Jacob says in Genesis 28:16 and also in 32:2, God is in this place. Jacob, Israel, did gain a victory, and he limped away a different man thereafter. And perhaps it's a reminder to us that if we draw close to God, be prepared to be altered. Be prepared to be changed. Be prepared to be transformed. At least in some way. To engage God, to worship God, to praise God, to adore God is to be changed. Small ways, large ways, and all the ways in between. We are made different if we truly encounter the living God. If we do not worship in spirit and in truth, as Jesus says in the Gospel of John, it doesn't make any difference. Because the Spirit cannot touch our spirits. The truth cannot reach us about our deformities of character. If what we do on Sundays or in our small groups, our home groups, whatever, if it does not change us, if we walk through the same set of doors that we walked in when we walk out, if those doors don't look different, then probably we haven't engaged God. Because there's been no change in us. And whatever form of worship you use, whether it's Catholic Mass or Quaker Silence or whatever, Episcopalian, Lutheran, if what we're doing as Christians in worship isn't altering us, then perhaps we need to rethink our forms of worship. Weakened and crippled, Jacob Israel limps away, but with a blessing. From that point forward, the people of God will have to think deeply about the cost of being blessed. That is a profound thought. Thinking about the cost of being blessed. And I'll give you just one little phrase that has stuck with me for the years. We are blessed by God to be a blessing. There is a cost to it. We're not to be spiritual hoarders just holding the blessing. We are blessed to go into the world to be blessers, to bless people. And this is, of course, it's paradoxical, it's counterintuitive to human nature. But isn't that the very essence of the Spirit of God, at least part of the Spirit of God? Remember what God says through the prophet Isaiah in the 55th chapter? For my thoughts are not your thoughts, neither are your ways my ways, declares the Lord. As the heavens are higher than the earth, so are my ways higher than your ways, and my thoughts than your thoughts. God renames Jacob to Israel. Jesus renames 3 of his 12 apprentices in the 3rd chapter of Mark. We read in Mark chapter 3, beginning in verse 16, Jesus went up on a mountainside, the place of covenant, the place of revelation, and called to them those he wanted. And they came to him, Simon, to whom he gave the name Peter, James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John, to whom he gave the name Boanerges. I didn't say that right. Boanerges, which means sons of thunder. Sounds like a wrestling match team to me, a pair of wrestlers, the sons of thunder. But Jesus renames. New identity, new creation, new mission. The Pharisee, Saul of Tarsus, is blinded and goes without food and cannot see for 3 days like a dead man. But note, God instructs a Christian brother, Ananias, to go to Saul the persecutor, welcome him as a brother in the faith. But don't miss this part in Acts 9:16. I will show him, God is speaking to Ananias about Paul, I will show Paul how much he must suffer for my name. Jacob suffered. His name was changed. He was blessed. Paul is told he's going to suffer. He becomes a blessing to the Gentile and the Jewish world, as probably the greatest missionary that ever walked the face of the earth other than Jesus. And hidden away 4 chapters later, after Saul's trip to Syrian Antioch, Saul's journey to Jerusalem, and now during Saul's first missionary trip to Cyprus, we read this little phrase hidden in Acts 13:9. 4 chapters after Saul has met the living Christ. Then Saul, who was called Paul, a new name, a new identity, one that involves suffering. It is disclosed to Saul the cost of being engaged by the Spirit of Jesus on the road, that Saul must suffer for my name. And now Saul is Paul, not dissimilar to Jacob's own experience. And even in the book of Revelation, which unveils the suffering love of God's people and God himself, this God who inevitably vanquishes secular power and death, we read in the letter to the church at Pergamum, which was the seat of Satan's throne, which is probably the Roman imperial throne of the emperor at that time ruling. The followers of Jesus who patiently endure and overcome God, we are told, will be given a white stone and a new name written on that stone that no one knows except the one who receives it. Notice that. A new name that no one knows except the one who receives it. The mystery. You cannot have power over me because I've been given a new name, a new identity. And in the midst of an idolatrous empire, God renames His own, a mysterious name. As we go on through, we can see over and over how we're called not to be a Jacob that is strong and agile and is a person who pulls himself up by the bootstraps. Over and over, we're told weakness, to be weak. Paul says, when I am weak, I am strong. We're told about Jesus in 2 Corinthians, He was crucified in weakness, yet He lives by the power of God. And even though Jesus rejected any attempt to grasp and overreach His vocation as the man of God, He rejected equality with God. He rejected equality with God, Philippians 2. He would not use that power. He chose weakness and became humble and became a servant and even died, even died on a cross. This Jesus limped away. He limped away from the cross, dead and defeated. But He was raised in power, a power that gives life to the crippled, the wounded, and the assaulted. The one that was mocked, beaten, spit upon, and completely made a cripple, dead on a cross. God exalted Him to the highest place, gave Him a name that's above every name, that at the name of Jesus every knee should bow, and every tongue acknowledge that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. He rose up, was given a new name, the Christ, the Anointed, the Messiah, and that at that name, the beaten, mocked, spit upon, executed Jesus raised in ineffable glory, where every knee shall bow. And so we're given a choice to remain large and in charge like Jacob, a choice to rely on our own strength and our own abilities, a choice to be a giant among others, overreaching, grasping for power and attention, or even resorting to being a trickster. Or we can let the mysterious Spirit of God touch us, a Spirit that wrestles with us, assaulting us with the truth, a truth that forever cripples us and alters us and our walk. A truth that leads to our own magnificent defeat. A choice to allow our weaknesses to be turned to strength, so we can become like those mentioned in the great Hall of Fame in Hebrews chapter 11, who became powerful in battle and routed foreign armies. This is the great challenge that Jacob and this Night Stalker and the Spirit of God leaves with us. He was a man who started out in one direction, and then the Spirit of God came to him in the darkness, in his solitary loneliness, facing his mortality, and he was given a new name, a new identity, and limped away a different person. May we continue to limp forward in God's power. Lord bless you all.